Rebonjour-hi, bienvenue, welcome back sur le podcast de Sur deux roues. Cette semaine, on a un podcast en anglais, alors que l'on reçoit nul autre que Derek G. Le takeover de mon podcast par les Grands Prix Cyclistes de Québec et Montréal se poursuit pour un 4e et dernier épisode. If you're an English listener, skip the intro to the 2 or 3 minute mark. Aujourd'hui, Derek nous parlera de sa carrière, de ce que représentent les Grands Prix pour lui, et de ses aspirations lors des prochaines épreuves, y compris les Championnats du monde de Montréal 2026. J'espère que cette série vous aura donné le goût de venir voir les meilleurs cyclistes au monde prendre les rues de Québec et Montréal lors des seules courses UCI World Tour en Amérique, le 13 septembre prochain à Québec et le 15 septembre à Montréal. Sur ce, trêve d'introduction, sans plus tarder, allons parler à Derek.
Hey, how's it going?
Very good yourself.
Good, thanks.
I just feel I've been watching you for the past 2 years in my TV, and now I finally meet you, so that's amazing. How have you been?
Good. Yeah. Just nice time away from racing right now, so some relaxed time.
Yeah, that was quite a last 2 years for you, right?
Yeah, it's been crazy, especially just these last couple months. Just from the Dauphiné until the Olympics was a pretty intense block. So
Sure. Maybe we can start because I just feel like a lot of people know you but don't know the background story, because you had this crazy hype starting at the Giro 2023 and there was not a lot of bio around about you. So maybe we could kick off with like, who's Derek G, and tell us your journey into cycling.
yeah, I mean, I started racing super young. I was probably 9 years old in the Ottawa community. My dad raced masters, so I went to races with him, did some local TTs, did some local cyclocross races, and then started pretty young racing in Quebec. Just the local, French, like Quebec Cup races, Saint Martin and those kind of races, and yeah, just fell in love with the sport. I'd always been a big, obviously, pro cycling fan, watching the Tour since I was super young, and from there I pursued it until my second year junior. And then decided to go to school, realized I missed racing my bike. The avenue back was through track cycling, so I raced that up until the Olympics, and then in Tokyo, and then I got the opportunity to just join the Conti team of my current team. So I got a chance there, and then a few months later moved up.
That's crazy. So you went straight from track to road cycling, like pro road cycling, right?
Yeah, so we were all in on the team pursuit for Tokyo. That was the program, was just basically team pursuiting. We did a little bit of bunch racing, but largely that was the focus, and it was just to qualify for Tokyo. The men's team pursuit hadn't qualified for something like 40 years, so that was the big goal, was kind of the building up of that program since 2014, and it worked. We went to the Olympics, but then I came out of the other side with very few road results, very, very little road racing. So yeah, the team looked at my numbers and they said, hey, you have really good, power numbers, but we're missing something here. You haven't raced your road bike in any big events, and so that was a bit of a transition of, come to Europe, get your head kicked in for a little bit, figure it out, and yeah, I managed to get a spot on the pro team a little while after.
Okay. And I guess you didn't get your ass kicked in for very long, because your Giro 2023 was awesome. I'm a huge fan of watching the Giro because it's beautiful, and then every morning I just felt like you were out there, and you were out there, really. So were you expecting to be amongst like the best cycling at your rookie year?
No, not even a little bit. I mean, I think the start of that year, I'd already raced quite a bit before the Giro, even though it's kind of still an early season race. and it had gone almost as you'd expect a first year professional season to go. Nothing spectacular. I was helping my teammates and more just trying to learn. And I didn't have any ambitions going into the Giro for results because, first Grand Tour, it wasn't on the calendar from the beginning of the season. And then, I think Grand Tour racing just clicked a little bit better with me than the other races I'd done, the 1 days or the 1 weeks. And I was just taking every opportunity I could.
Yeah. And what went through your mind? Because I mean, you were out there basically every day. So,
Yeah.
I read a lot of books written by pro cyclists, and they all say, like, when you start, you're kind of intimidated by you know, let's say senior athletes, and then I don't know, you were all out every morning when I tuned in. So what went through your mind every morning?
100%. I mean, I was definitely, I had that intimidation of you're racing guys who have been pro for 10 years plus. They know the ins and outs of the peloton, and you've been in the professional peloton for 5 months, and it is for sure intimidating. But I think I also didn't have any expectation on myself, so it was kind of like, well, at some point I'm going to blow up. At some point, I'm going to get dropped out of the break, and it's almost the expectation, and it didn't happen. And I think every day I kind of saw as, my last chance of, well, at some point I'm going to be, on my hands and knees for the rest of this Grand Tour, because it's going to catch up to me. It's my first Grand Tour. And so every day was like, well, you might as well try and go for the break, because I had a free card from the team at that point, and it was like, well, you can try and go for the break. If it doesn't work, it's expected, and if it does work, great, that's a bonus. But it was that every single day, and it just kept working out. Not quite. I didn't win anything, but it worked out pretty well.
And I guess we can say that it never caught up to you, because you were, until I think last stages, you were in the break.
Yeah, it definitely caught up to me after the race. I think I had good legs about a week later, and then I was just a mess.
Dead. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. And so also 2024, battling for top 10 in the GC, ending up 9th in the GC with a strong last TT. Tell us more about this other breakthrough moment in your career. Were you expecting, was it the initial plan to go for GC, and were you expecting such a great result?
No to both, actually. I mean, after Dauphiné, that was the big surprise, was that I was told by the team to race Dauphiné for GC, but as kind of a second option, and just no pressure, race it to the line every day, see how it goes. The goal was a top 15. So came out of the big prep race for the Tour with a podium in GC, and it was like, well, the Tour is 3 weeks away. We had no expectation or no plan of doing GC at the Tour, so we just stuck to the original plan, which was to hunt for stages. The thing was that 8 days in, I hadn't really gone for the break. They kept telling me to race from the GC group, and I talked to the team. I was like, am I going for GC here? I really feel like I'm going for stages. And the head DS at the race was like, well, yeah, I mean, I did expect you to lose more time at this point. So he was like, stage 9 was the gravel day. He said, just race it like a 1 day, all in to win it, or if you lose 20 minutes, you lose 20 minutes. And so that stage went really well, made the break, got another minute and something on GC ahead of the peloton, and then I was in the top 10. And when you're in the top 10 in the Tour, even if it's only a week in out of the 3 weeks, it's not something you can just give up. You have to fight for that. So there was the shift in focus of, well, let's see how long you can hold on. And yeah, I had good days and I had not so good days, and but yeah, managed to hold on to the top 10. So wasn't the expectation and it wasn't the plan, but yeah, I'm pretty happy with it.
That's amazing. And I listen to a lot of podcasts myself, and I saw, I don't know, hosts of podcasts saying that you had a great first week, and then the second week they started questioning, like, is he going to go for a stage win? Is he going to start losing time? And then third week people were like, oh, he's gonna fade out slowly, but you never did. So what was going through your mind week over week?
Yeah, it was definitely a test. I mean, I was incredibly stressed because what I did in the Giro is one thing where, maybe every second day you're in the breakaway, which is a lot, but the days you're not in the breakaway, there's no stress. You're sitting up, you're in the gruppetto, you lose a ton of time because you're not going for GC and you get an easy day and it doesn't matter. But it's a big test, especially in the last week when there's less sprint stages, less easy days. You're going all out every single day. Then you don't know how your body's going to react. So basically every decisive day, every big mountain stage, I was kind of, holding my breath as we approached the final climb, like, oh, I hope my legs are good, or not terrible. So yeah, it was definitely a stressful experience, but I think the Giro, although it was a little bit different, gave me some confidence of, well, at least I know 3 weeks in, my legs won't totally disappear, but yeah, I'm just glad they held on.
Cool. And let's start talking a little bit about Grands Prix Cyclistes. So could you let us know, because I know what's the perception of Grands Prix Cyclistes in Quebec, but how do people perceive those two races in Canada or outside of Quebec?
I mean, I'm from Ottawa, so 2 hours from Montreal.
Yeah.
So it's pretty massive in that community. There is a massive cycling community. I remember the first edition I went to, I rode there with a group from Ottawa. So I think it was 200K, and then we got a hotel and watched Montreal, and then took the bus back. And it was so special because this was the first edition where they had World Tour races coming to Canada, and if you're a young aspiring cyclist in Europe, I mean, you can drive an hour and you can go see a World Tour race. It's just the way it works, It doesn't matter where you're from. You could be from Poland and you go see Tour of Poland, you could be from Italy, you go see the Giro. But I'd never experienced that. I'd never seen pros in real life. I'd never, gotten that kind of wow factor of watching them race live. And so that was so amazing. And it was the same with basically, I mean, I was young, but everyone in the Ottawa community who, even if they were in their 70s, maybe they'd never watched pro racing, but they were part of the Ottawa cycling community, and it was something so special that when those races first started. So I actually maybe only got the opportunity once more to go back and watch them live before I raced them. But yeah, it's pretty special, the impact those races have had.
Yeah. And that's crazy. You saw them live twice and then you raced. That's and what was your reaction? How old were you when you first saw the Grand Prix in real life?
I think I was 13. So it was 2010. It was the first year of the races, and Tommy Vogler won in Quebec. And then in Montreal afterwards, he was riding back after the race, and I got an autograph from him. And then he was French champion at the time, and he gave me his gloves. And I still have those gloves. It was pretty cool.
That's amazing. That's great because, I always talk about on the podcast and how I meet cyclists, and they are like average people. They are just people who enjoy cycling, and then they are so generous with their time and stuff. And that's great to hear that you had such an experience. But You rode from Ottawa to Montreal at 13 years old?
Yeah, I think I don't know if I did the whole 200. I maybe did because we live just south of Ottawa, so we would have met them somewhere. But yeah, probably 150 something, something like that. But I'm pretty sure I
Hope you
sat in
had
the
a
wheel.
tailwind that day.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so let's jump to well, tell us about your experience the first time you raced Grands Prix Cyclistes of Quebec and Montreal in 2024. What was the feeling to be playing at home, I would say?
It was incredibly special. I was supposed to do those races for the first time in 2020 with the national team, and the same in 2021 with the national team, which obviously both got canceled with COVID. And then in 2022, I was on the development team of Israel Premier Tech, so I couldn't race because it was a World Tour race. I couldn't race up and race that with the pro team. So it was this buildup of so many years where I was so close to being able to race it. And obviously, since the races started, it was like the one race I want to do is especially Montreal because it's so close to home. And so it was pretty amazing to finally get to race. And it was after the Giro, so there was a little bit more, like more people knew who I was than just my immediate friends and family, which is usually the case. Um, yeah, it was just amazing. I think I suffered so much in Quebec um, and in Montreal, but in Quebec especially, it's not a course that's really suited to me. It's super steep, super punchy, and I was having a hard time that day. But it's just the feeling of racing in front of Canadians. It
Hmm.
was yeah. It's hard to describe how special that was.
Well, yeah, so yeah, it's really steep. I think it's my third podcast with World Tour cyclists, and they all say that Côte de la Montagne, the first super steep one,
Yeah, yeah.
is quite hard, but it's followed by Côte de la Potasse, which is harder because of the first climb. So that's quite interesting to see that everyone seems to agree that Quebec is hell.
Yeah, yeah, it's super. I mean, that's the thing is Montreal. Montreal is so difficult because it's so attritional. It's
Mhm.
you're I guess you're kind of on the pedals all day, but it's also it definitely hurts less because eventually you're just worn out and you get dropped. Whereas Quebec are these short, steep, like super hard efforts, and that's where the separation is made. And yeah, that's a lot worse for me. In Montreal, I mean, it's as hard as it's an unbelievably hard parcours, but if you get dropped, 180K into the race, you've basically been going full gas for a couple hours at that point. Uh, it's yeah, it's nice to have that kind of diversity between the two races.
It is for I think the spectators too. So if we talk about we talked about like your Mr. Breakaway, I think, at the Giro, and if we and you mentioned you were supposed to be on the national team. So if someone from the national team is listening right now, what kind of advice would you give to someone like rookie into World Tour races? What advice would you give?
I think a big thing is to not underestimate the attritional aspect of World Tour racing because I think especially in my first races, I was shocked. It was very much this isn't so hard, and then you realize that, or maybe you see numbers online. I used to do this all the time, and you went, oh, these are the watts this guy did to win the race, and you're thinking, I can do that. I do that. I could do that in training any day, and then you realize how much it actually, how hard it is to produce these under that much fatigue. 6 hours in when UAE's been riding all day or something like that. You know, it's the kind of thing where when you go into your first World Tour races, it also depends if you want to go for the break. If you go for the break in Quebec, Montreal, it's I mean, that to me is a pretty special experience. I'd like to experience one day where, you know, you're racing in front of a home crowd. You're not going to get the real like atmosphere of racing in a World Tour bunch and the dynamics of all that. But I think that's more like, you know what, I'm in a World Tour race. It's going to be hard for me to show anything against the best in the world, but if I get in the break, then I can show something, and you know, I'll get to race in front of friends and family and get TV time, and that's pretty special in itself. But yeah, racing from the peloton is so much just wrapping your head around how much energy conservation you have to do, thinking about the little things, even if you're, you know, 160 kilometers from the finish, because after 160 kilometers, those little things add up massively. So yeah, I mean, it doing Quebec and Montreal would be a very unique experience for the national team. I'm actually disappointed I never got to do that, because it's such a different dynamic of not racing World Tour races all year and then stepping into 2 incredibly difficult one days. But yeah, I'm sure that's also a pretty special experience with the national jersey on.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. And I've heard some people saying like how hard it was versus everything they've done, because they've never raced at that level. So I think those advices will be interesting for them if they listen, and I'll try to forward to anyone on the national team so they can hear you share a little bit of advice. So okay, the next question is kind of tricky. Okay, let's say that your directeur sportif, your DS says you can do anything you want at the Grand Prix Cyclistes this year. What would be your objective on those 2 days?
I mean, the thing is with a race like Quebec, especially in my position, is even if I was given a free card to do whatever I wanted in Quebec, for me, it would be the same as what my job's going to be. It's going to be to try and set up the guys, because we have a team that's really suited to Quebec. Corbin was second last year. It's a great race for him. I think Stevie is coming this year. I mean, you can see he won Flèche Wallonne. That's a guy who likes, you know, punchy climbs. And yeah, if one of them could win the race, that would be pretty special. With Montreal, it's tough because I think Pogačar had it on his calendar. So if Quebec comes down to a sprint, you know, obviously it's still a good sprint for Pogačar, but he's beatable. Whereas in Montreal, it's like, okay, this is a race of who's the strongest guy. And I think there's usually a clear out and out answer when Tade's in the race. So I think it'll be interesting. I think because he's in the race, either his team will keep the pace so high, you know, no one can breathe and you can't move. And if that's not the case, I think it's gonna open super early, which would make for very exciting racing, because no one wants to go to the last climb on the last lap with Pogačar. You know, no one wants to hit Mont Royal with 1 to go and say, you know, oh, I can just beat him up here. It's like, well, that's a tall ask.
Yeah, we've watched the news.
Yeah. So it would make for good racing if it's not just too hard a pace for anyone to attack early.
Yeah. And okay, my last question was added last minute by the organization, because you know the same organization as Grand Prix Cyclistes will host Championnats du monde 2026, so Montreal 2026. Do you have any objective for that race?
It's a really interesting one, because World Championships is always something where, I mean, this is my second year pro, and I've always I've never been in contention at a World Championships. I've never, it's been very much okay, you go to World Championships, you get your head kicked in, you get dropped, and it's kind of like, well, it's World Championships, But I think with how the last 2 years have gone, I wouldn't have expected the progression in certain races like Grand Tours. I wouldn't have expected that progression, say, to be able to fight for the top 10 in the Tour this year. So if it's at all possible, if I can still keep on this trajectory of progression and have good legs in Montreal, I mean, I think who knows come 2026, it doesn't matter if I don't have a single result in a one day. I think I'm still going to mark it on my calendar as, hey, I'd like to peak for this race. It's that level. A World Championships at home so rarely comes around that I think it's worth, marking on the calendar and saying I want to be at my best come September that year. So yeah, I think hopefully I have good legs, but regardless of whether I do or not, I think that's going to be a pretty special experience racing Worlds at home.
That must be hard to peak in September, especially that late. I mean, I'm just an average Joe, so for me, I can only peak once a year, and hopefully it's not on Zwift in April, but like, what's the kind of training you would do to peak in September, late September?
Yeah, the biggest thing I think would be, I mean, it always depends on the other goals for the season. If it's Giro, Tour, Vuelta, who knows? With the Vuelta, it's super easy because you would finish the Vuelta and hope that your legs are good afterwards. A lot of times I think your legs go in one of two directions. You don't usually come out of a Grand Tour the same as you entered it. You're exhausted, or you have this super compensation and your legs are, you're flying. Look at Van der Poel at Worlds last year after the Tour. If not, I think the best replication that everyone seems to do is altitude camp. So if it's what I did before Dauphiné, and those were, I mean, arguably my best legs of the season were in Dauphiné. So I think that would probably be the route of, obviously you couldn't be racing the Vuelta. If you race the Tour, then finish the Tour, take a break, go up to altitude, do a big block there, and then come down to sea level and get some more intensity in. But it's really interesting because when it comes to a stage race, it's easy to work on that kind of thing because you're basically just trying to raise your level of fitness. Whereas when it comes to a one day, it really depends on the specific demands of the course. I don't know how long Worlds is going to be. I imagine 250 plus kilometers on a circuit similar to Montreal. So that's not going to be an easy race. So yeah, that would take a little bit of looking into to get ready for.
Cool. I have one last question. It was not part of the list I shared with the PR manager, but
Yeah.
I see that you have your Olympic t-shirt. So
Yeah.
is it harder to race a much smaller pack, just like at the Olympics? I think you were, what, 89?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, just under 90. Yeah.
Yeah. And or is it easier to race a pack just like Grand Prix Cyclistes?
It was definitely an interesting dynamic. I mean, I think a big part of what made it not as chaotic as it could be was that the race was 275 or something ridiculously long. So I think when you have teams that small in a short race, let's say 200 or less, it could be absolutely chaos. People could be, attacking left, right, and center right from the gun, no control. But I think because it was so long, everyone kind of looked at each other, but we don't want to do that for 275 kilometers. So actually, despite the small team sizes, the small field sizes, it was raced quite similarly to, a typical pro one day. The racing kicked off pretty late, and it was. I think there was a lot of nerves around the lack of control that there could be in a race like that, but it ended up being very similar.
Yeah, unfortunately, I was not able to watch it till the end. I think I was camping and I was hiding in the bushes from my family, watching it on my phone, and I don't know, I ran out of network or 5G, and last thing I saw, you were, I think, in front or behind Mike in the cobble section, and then it cut. And I was so mad, I just decided not to watch the replay.
Yeah, it was an interesting race for us, because Mike was kind of just starting, I think, his big season goals. He did San Sebastian after, and then he's got the Vuelta and he's got Worlds, and I was just kind of finishing, the Tour and the Dauphiné, and so we were both in kind of odd places of our build. It didn't go fantastically, but it is pretty special to race the Olympics for Canada.
Right. Well, I think that's it. I don't have any more questions. I'll wish you a good luck in Quebec and Montreal. I'll look forward to see you and probably chat a little bit at the Delta, because I'll be there with the team at Grand Prix to create content. So wishing you good luck, and hopefully I'll be able to wish you good luck in person.
Sweet. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Merci d'avoir écouté cet épisode et un énorme merci à Derek d'avoir accepté l'invitation. N'hésitez surtout pas à vous abonner au podcast afin d'écouter ou réécouter les autres épisodes de cette série. Enfin, avant de se quitter, les Grands Prix Cyclistes aimeraient en profiter pour remercier les partenaires qui rendent l'événement possible. Le gouvernement du Canada, le gouvernement du Québec, la Ville de Québec, la Ville de Montréal, Québécois, Tudor et Écoille. Sur ce, je vous dis à bientôt, on se voit au Grand Prix Cycliste.